All right, let's be real. Have you ever looked at your code and just seen a giant tangled mess of if-else statements? The ones just to check if a simple form is valid? We've all been there. So the big question is your validation code a mess?
Well, what if I told you there's a much cleaner way to handle this, built right into .NET? It's called Data Annotations. And honestly, the concept is super simple. They're basically just little tags or attributes that you stick directly onto your models. So your validation rules live right alongside the data they're protecting. It just makes sense, right?
So why should you care? Well, it's a huge deal for a few reasons. First off, you're validating incoming data right at the front door, stopping any junk from getting in. This means you get to completely ditch all that spaghetti code you wrote for manual validation. The result? Your APIs become way more reliable, way easier to manage, and you're getting more security by writing less code. It's a win-win. And the coolest part is how this all works automatically inside ASP.NET Core. It's like a built-in checkpoint. So requests comes in, the framework grabs the data, and tries to fit it into your model. Then, and this is the magic part, before your code even sees it, it runs all those data annotation checks. All the results get tucked into this thing called model state. If anything fails, bam, it automatically stops everything and sends back a bad request response. Your controller code doesn't even have to lift a finger.
Okay, enough theory, let's get our hands dirty. We're going to look at the core set of tools, the attributes you'll probably find yourself using every single day.
First up, the one you can't live without, required. It's exactly what it sounds like. It just makes sure a value is actually there, not null, not empty. This is your absolute first line of defense. Next, we've got string length. For things like usernames or post titles where you need to cap the length. You just pop in a number and you're done. Clean, simple, and it can save you from some nasty database errors. And for numbers, there's range. It lets you define a clear lower and upper limit. Think user age, or maybe the quantity of an item in a shopping cart, or even a rating from 1 to 5. Super useful. What about specific formats? Say, an email address. Well, before you go off and write some crazy regular expression, just use the email address attribute. It does all the heavy lifting for you. No need to reinvent the wheel. But okay, what if you do need your own custom, complex pattern? For that, you bring out the big guns, regular expression. This is your go-to for anything tricky. Phone numbers with a specific format, zip codes, you name it. If you can write a regex for it, you can validate it. All right, let's pull all of this together and see what it looks like in the real world. So here's a typical user DTO. Check this out. You can just stack the attributes right on top of each other. The name is both required and has a string length. The age has a range to make sure they're an adult, and this one's really cool. Look at confirm password. It uses compare password to make sure it matches the other password field. See? So clean, so readable. This is how you build powerful validation with hardly any code. Okay, the built-in stuff is awesome. It really is. It covers maybe 90% of what you need. But what about that other 10%? What happens when you have a business rule that's totally unique to your application? Well, the good news is you can just create your own. And it's actually way easier than you might think. It boils down to just 3 simple steps. 1, you make a new class that inherits from validation attribute. 2, you override the isValid method. This is where you put your custom logic. And 3, you just return a validation result. That's it. You've just created a brand new reusable validation rule. But hang on, what if your validation isn't about a single property? What if you need to compare, say, 3 different fields all at once? A simple attribute won't cut it there. For that kind of model-level validation, there's an interface called iValidatable You just implement it right on your DTO, and it gives you one single place to write logic that looks at the entire object as a whole. All right, so at this point, data annotations probably seem like a silver bullet, right? They solve so many problems. But this is where we need to take a step back and think like a senior dev, like an architect, because they're not perfect. Let's talk about the limitations, the gotchas. And it's super important to get this part. First, the rules are static. They're baked into your code when you compile it. That makes them a real pain to unit test. But the biggest deal breaker? No dependency injection. Think about that. You can't inject a service, so you can't do things like, check a database to see if a username is already taken. On top of all that, they're not async. In today's world, that can be a major roadblock. You really see these weaknesses when you put them side by side with a library like Fluent Validation. Data annotations are attribute-based, right? They're simple and declarative.
But Fluent validation is code-based. You write validation logic using Fluent code, which gives you, well, everything data annotations are missing. Total flexibility, full dependency injection support, async, the whole shebang. They're really just two different tools for two very different levels of complexity. Which brings us to the most important part of this whole conversation, the golden rule. The real mark of a good developer isn't just knowing the tools, it's knowing when to use them, and just as importantly, when not to. So here's the simple takeaway, the cheat sheet, if you will. You should absolutely use data annotations for validating the DTOs at the edge of your API. They are perfect for defining the shape of your data, simple, static rules. But, and this is the critical part, keep them away from your core domain logic. The moment your validation gets complex or needs to talk to a database or might change based on business needs, that's your sign to use something else.
Look, if you only take one thing away from this, let it be this. Data annotations are your first line of defense. They're fantastic for that initial, simple check on your DTOs. But in any real scalable application, they are not enough. They need to be backed up by a more powerful tool, like Fluent validation, for your deep business rules. Think of data annotations as the bouncer at the front door, not the head of security for the entire building. So there you have it. When you use them for the right job, data annotations will make your code cleaner, safer, and so much easier to maintain. You have the tool now, you know its strengths, and you know its weaknesses. You know exactly where it belongs in your architecture. So the only question left is your architecture ready for it?